ago, a man named John went looking for disciples. No, he wasn't looking for James or Peter or even Jesus. This was John Lennon, who at age 16 met 15-year-old Paul McCartney and 14-year-old George Harrison. The trio clicked and went on to play music for several years before signing up with an agent and then with a record company. Their drummer was Pete Best. However, once the group began recording for a big label, it became clear that Pete Best wasn't fitting in. Some say his drumming wasn't up to snuff. Others say he never really clicked with his three bandmates. But no matter the reason, someone else would be chosen as that fourth Beatle. It was a drummer from another local band who knew his name, and Ringo, at the first recording session, impressed the band and the management just enough to land that job. He and the others would then go on to become some of the most famous insects that ever lived. Now, there's several things that you and I can pull apart from the story. Maybe it's their ages. Did you guys see your bulletin covers? I mean, my gosh, are those guys young looking or what? I think Ringo looks like he just ran from the playground to have somebody wipe his nose. We could also talk about the focus and the drive that these four young people had at such a young age. They say that by the time the Beatles recorded their first song, that they had played together for 10,000 hours at such a young age. The dedication and the focus. You know, and what we could also talk about is the capricious nature of life and the odds of these four really talented people in their own rights, all growing up within just a few miles of one another. But what we're going to focus on is Ringo's good fortune in being chosen. And what a future that unlocked for him. In him we see the power and we see the gift of being chosen. And when you and I think about it, more than our income, more than our families, more even than our health, the most important thing we have is the gift of being chosen by God. The gift of being chosen by Jesus means that we have the tools to cope with the perfect and the imperfect. We have got a rival music going on here. When we talk about the gift of being chosen, what does it mean to be chosen by Jesus? And the gift of being chosen means that we have the tools to cope with the imperfect and the perfect. We have the tools to cope with perfect and imperfect vocations, perfect and imperfect families, and perfect and imperfect health. Perfect and imperfect interruptions, too. The gift of being chosen unlocks that relationship with Jesus in which we are either delivered from what plagues us, healed, restored, rewarded, or we're given the power to get through it. That's what real power is. Real power, I've said it before, is not about having great authority to command armies or to command employees or great money to get these things done. Great power is the ability to put up with things that you don't want to put up with and to stay in situations that you can't leave. My kids, when they ask me, what's maturity? I say, maturity is easy. It's just doing something you won't want to do for a long time. You're mature when you can do something you don't want to do for a long time. This is the power that we talk about from Jesus. The power to be able to put up with stuff we don't want to put up with. And the power to be faithful and kind and encouraging when you don't feel like doing that. And the gift of being chosen starts with a gentle invitation from Jesus. That's where the power comes from, the power of love incarnate in Jesus. In our gospel this morning, we meet Jesus. It's after his baptism. We hear John the Baptist say, we hear him say, you are the Lamb of God. And then he does something curious. He takes his disciples and he points them to Jesus. This is who I've been talking about. This is who I've been talking about. And we notice the kind and quiet nature of Jesus' conversation with these first followers. What are you looking for? He asks them. Where are you staying? And Jesus chooses to say to them something that he's saying to you and me today. Come and see. Where are you staying? Come and see. There's no coercion, no convincing going on here. Jesus isn't trying to sell them into being his disciple. Just a gentle invitation. Come and see. And I think that general invitation is something working in this congregation this morning. I wonder if you've ever gotten something similar, a quiet urging to draw closer to the light, a gentle nudging to pursue that good voice inside, a persistent prodding to set aside the distractions and draw closer to divine things. If you're like me, you sense something similar. You get that nudging inside you. It says something like, apologize first. Right? It's always something difficult. It's something like, don't criticize that person. Offer to help them. Open your heart. Or the worst, open your wallet. Right? I wonder if there's a gentle invitation inside of you this morning. One that's calling you to go deeper, to draw nearer, to listen to that nudging, to sweep away the distractions, and to draw closer to home. Years ago, Bob Dylan was interviewed by Rolling Stone magazine on this topic. Dylan was asked about the word calling. He said this, everybody has a calling. Some have a high calling, some have a low calling. Everybody is called, but few are chosen. Because there's a lot of distraction for people, so you might not ever find the real you. And a lot of people don't. We might say that there are two parts to being chosen. There is the invitation, and there's the response. There's this idea that we have been chosen, and how are we answering? In being chosen, we might note three different things. Being chosen is to be set aside for a purpose, and this is whether it's being chosen by God or for a little league team. Being chosen is to be set aside for a purpose. Being chosen is to be seen as possessing valuable gifts. And being chosen suggests confidence and belief in one's talents. God sees all of this in you, and God sees all of this in me, and He says all of this about you. And He says all of this about me. God has chosen us for a purpose. You and I aren't here because God had some sort of mixed media art project to do in art school. But we're here because God has an intention and a purpose for humanity. And for each one of us. What might that purpose be? I think purposes change in our lives. One year our purpose is perhaps to raise children. Another is to share God's gifts in a career. Another is to show God's compassion by caring for elderly parents. God has chosen us to do God's work. What's that look like for us? What's that purpose look like for us today? And how are we recognizing it and living into it, even though it might not be something we chose? Secondly, God gives us gifts that are valuable, as handsome and pretty and affable and entertaining as you might be. You didn't get hired for your job for that. You got hired at your job because you could do the work. We had the gifts that were valuable enough for our employers to agree to fork over a lot of cash in return for them. When God chooses us, it's because we too are recognized for that unique and valuable gift that we have to further God's work in the world. God's got work to do, and that's why we're here. We have valuable gifts inside of us to give back. And what does that look like for each one of us? And finally, God has chosen us because God believes in us. I think that's really one of the harder things to grasp. Some of the hardest work you and I actually do is believing that we have more than we think we have. You know, they say 90% of all weight loss decisions are made in the kitchen, and 10% are made in the gym. The same kind of true for faith. 90% of the game is believing what God tells us, and 10% is like doing it. I don't know about you, but you look around, you see some people have like risen to like some place, and you're like, they are so unqualified. But they believed in themselves, right? They believed in themselves. The power of belief, the power of faith is really pretty amazing. It's believing that we're good enough, that we're capable enough, that our lives have a trajectory, our deeds are, in fact, in God's eyes, invaluable. God believes in you. God believes that you and I are doing the things with our lives that are critical to the well-being of people around us and the planet on which we stand. God has faith in us. We need faith in God. What's that look like for us today? What do we need faith for today? In what ways is God calling us to do things that we think are beyond our capabilities, but we get the sense that God believes we can do them? In 1967, a young man named Alistair Taylor, he asked Paul McCartney, how do you write songs? Paul McCartney said, come over to my house. So he welcomed him in his house, he took him into his dining room. And in his dining room was this lovely hand-carved harmonium. So Paul and Alistair then sat down, and Paul just began playing random notes, and the two of them began shouting antonyms back and forth to each other. Black, white, good, bad, yes, no, hello, goodbye. And before long, Paul had cobbled together a tune, and the idea for the lyrics for what would become that #1 selling hit both in the UK and in the US, Hello, Goodbye. As Paul and eventually John would fine-tune those lyrics, so would they also fine-tune the philosophy behind that song? What were they trying to say? The idea is that everything has its opposite. Antonyms abound, so that there is inherently a choice to choose black or white, to choose good or bad, to say yes or to say no. When Jesus says, come and see, we have chosen to come. And when that small, gentle voice prods us to pick one path over another, we pray that we'll choose to follow that voice. And when God calls us to draw nearer, step closer, stay longer, we can say yes, or we can say no. We pray for the former, and we wonder what that will look like for us for the rest of the week. More important than our income, our families, our health, is the gift of being chosen by God. Chosen and equipped, given power, and given the ability to choose the light. Let us give thanks to God in word and song right here, and in the work of our hands and hearts out there. Amen. We believe in one God,
the Father, the Almighty, maker of heaven and